Julia George.
BBC Radio Kent.
We were talking about young drivers and how to keep them safer for their own benefit and for the benefit of everybody on the roads as well. The Association of British Insurers says that youngsters should be banned from driving late at night and from driving other people around in their cars for a certain period after they've passed their test. They also think that youngsters should spend at least a year learning to drive. Well, we're joined now by David Barton. David is a Kent motoring lawyer. And David, before we talk about the work you've been doing in Kent schools, what do you make of the ideas from the Association of British Insurers? Would they help?
I think the ideas have the potential to be very helpful. The ideas are not wholly new. I think one of the things that the association did was to adopt a lot of the research that's been conducted since rules similar to this were adopted at least 10 to 15 years ago in the United States, where they've been very successful. The US introduced a system of graduated licensing in the 90s in order to deal with what it regarded as a high death toll on its roads involving, and accident rates involving youngsters.
And what is it? Has it been quite demonstrable that has made a difference? That is saving lives.
The objective is to save lives, both amongst the youngsters that are said to be increasingly involved in these incidents. That's to say drivers between 17 and 24. And also those others who are involved, the innocent drivers, who may also become involved. So the US experience, and indeed Canada and New Zealand, those have all indicated that the introduction of graduated licensing involving curfews, one of the key proposals is the abolition of it's a misnomer, the crash course, where you can take a driving course very quickly.
You can do it. I remember friends of mine doing it in a week.
Well, you can be taught to pass a test, but you don't learn to drive.
It's a little bit like the education system broadly in this country, some might say.
Yes. Whereas in some US states, there's a mandatory minimum number of driving hours that you have to take. Some of them are 65 hours as a minimum, 10 hours at night, and 5 hours in bad conditions.
It's got to be hours on the road that really teach us how to drive and how to drive in different conditions.
It's road skills that you can only learn by doing it. But the objective, and one applauds it, is ultimately the objective of trying to save young and other lives.
Do you come up against, I mean, I've described you as a motoring lawyer. What does that mean? Because I'm intrigued to know how close you get to the sort of death and destruction on the roads.
Well, my practice, a part of my practice, a substantial part, is I represent and I help drivers who are being prosecuted in magistrates' courts and Crown courts, and most of my work is Kent-based. And every now and again you encounter circumstances that are just sad. I've got 3 young children who have all gone through the driving process. I call them young children, they're young adults. 20, 21 and 24. And they've all been through this, and they've had friends who have been through the learning exercise. And one routinely reads of the tragic loss of not just life, but also serious injuries that are just life-changing.
Yes.
And for which some will never recover.
Yes, it's a loss of potential, isn't it? Even where there's no loss of life. Did you set your own rules for your children about how... Okay, the chuckle probably says that there were some interesting conversations in your house.
Yes, we had some interesting debates. And you try. But I think if mine at different times... I think, like most parents, our contemporaries, sometimes they listened, and the reality is that sometimes they didn't. But I think, drawing on from the American experience, and it's a useful guide, it's been successful there because of a cultural change amongst young drivers, but also amongst parents, who have a significant part to play in a culture change.
A lot of young drivers now can't even begin to hope to own their own car and insure it. Isn't the sort of the marketplace actually creating a safer driving culture anyway? Because there are so many youngsters who simply can't afford, because insurance is so expensive, particularly for young
insurance is high for young drivers. And the insurance industry has been introducing a number of alternatives to try and make insurance more affordable. It is a barrier, but research suggests that a lot of families are getting round it by having one of the parents as the main driver, when in fact he or she isn't, and having the youngster as a named driver on the policy. It's a lower premium. Strictly speaking, it's illegal.
Well, this is what I was going to say. As a lawyer, could that get you in trouble if there was an accident and it could be demonstrated that you really didn't tell the truth on your insurance application? What would happen?
If the insurance company looked at it sufficiently closely, and some of them are, because it's aware that this goes on, it is a widespread problem, and if it looks into the documents relating to ownership of the car and who really drives it more often, if it's the youngster that drives it more often, and the parent has not been completely open with the insurance company, the insurers would be entitled to avoid liability. Technically, the youngster would be uninsured.
Has that happened yet, to your knowledge, or is that something that insurance companies may move towards?
To my knowledge, it has happened, where the insurers become suspicious about the frequency with which the youngster is actually driving. And they look at the reality, and if they think that mum and dad have got together with their young son or daughter to try and secure a lower premium by presenting a set of facts that isn't completely accurate, they're entitled to say, you're not insured. And that's a criminal offence, as well as creating some awful civil liabilities.
Yeah, absolutely. And we just heard from Janet in Dover, David, who says, my granddaughter, who lives in Australia, is learning to drive, and over there you have to have 100 hours of learning before you can take your test, and then once you pass, you have to have a big T on the back of the car for a year to show you're a new driver. I'm wondering what the T stands for.
I can't imagine.
No, not can I. It doesn't seem... But, I mean, that's even more extreme.
Perhaps it's a trainee. Training.
Of course.
Training.
Of course.
Yes.
Just took a moment of lateral thinking there. David was much quicker than me. That's even more extreme than the American model you were talking about.
Well, what's proposed for here by the Association of British Insurers is a period of 12 months. That you can't take a test until that period is expired. I suppose with the number of hours that are put in the US, perhaps it is more severe, perhaps the hours are simply spread out, but graduated licensing in the US, for example, and the same as in Canada, it's done in 3 stages, and you can't speed the process up. And I think the US is also, it's been successful in bringing in parental support. It's also very successful in a fairly stringent imposition of violation penalties by the police.
Talk to me about your campaign. It's called Lose Your L Plates, Not Your Licence. You're going to go into Kent schools, and it's just starting now, talking to sixth formers. What will you be telling them? What's the campaign all about?
Well, it's doing something to try and make young drivers, learners, potential drivers, aware of the legal framework that applies to what they're going to be doing. I know from the experience of my own children that at the schools they attended, they had talks from the police, ambulance, fire service, and they brought their own perspective and their own stories. But from what I know is that there are very few schools indeed that have had an input from someone who does the type of work that I do. And it's an opportunity. I found that with my work, sometimes young drivers come to me directly. More often than not, it's with their parents that something has gone wrong. And there's an awful lot of myth, misunderstanding. I hesitate to use the word ignorance because that sounds judgmental, but there's a lot of misunderstanding about the legal framework. I find surprisingly, despite the fact that the legislation has been in place since about 2006, not that many know that if you acquire 6 penalty points, 2 fixed penalty speeding offences will do it within 2 years of getting your full licence, your licence is automatically revoked.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. It was brought in.
To the 2-year gap after you've just passed your test,
yes,
you mustn't get 6 points in that period otherwise.
You're what is called a new driver. You're in your probationary period. And if you acquire 6 points, 2 speeds will do it, 1 no insurance will do it, 1 careless drive will do it, then your licence is revoked automatically. It doesn't happen by court order, it's operation of law, and if you carry on driving in ignorance, you commit further offences and it just gets worse. So I found that there were very few that I dealt with personally that simply knew this happened. The first that some knew was a letter from DVLA telling them that you've had 2 fixed penalties, 6 points, your licence is revoked. The practical consequence is that you then have to obtain a new provisional licence, take a test again.
Is there a gap? Can you do that immediately or?
Oh, you can apply for a provisional licence straight away, but then you've got to retake your test, and there are future insurance implications. But I was finding people were routinely unaware that this had happened, and they carried on driving. Technically, would be doing so without a licence.
So this has clearly been put in place, and as you say, for 6 years now, but that was an early measure to say to youngsters, you've got to drive carefully because we will crack down on you if you don't.
Yes, that was the idea behind it.
Hasn't worked, though, because if people don't know about it, it's got no teeth, has it?
The first thing is knowledge. Unless people know about it, they won't drive to it.
Let me put another point to you from one of our listeners, because they're obviously interested in what you've got to say. They're phoning in with questions. Roger in Aylesford says, what does David think about black boxes in cars? Some insurance companies offer discounts if you have one fitted. They monitor and reward good driving. My 18-year-old has just passed his test, but isn't keen on having one in the car.
No, well, I worked with a family about 2 weeks ago, and their young son had been involved in fortunately, a relatively minor accident, but his car had been fitted with parental insistence in his car, and they found it very useful. On that particular case, the police were of the view that the lad had been speeding, and we were able to produce a printout from the black box to show that that wasn't so. Other things had happened. But there are insurance companies now that offer significant discounts for tracker. They're called tracker policies. And they measure or they assess drivers' braking, routine, speed, cornering, a variety of things like that. And they help insurers see what the underlying driving is like, which is what they want to know. So I did a quick look at the internet this morning, and there are some significant discounts available.
So should Roger insist on one for his 18-year-old?
Some do it, and this particular family, they said to their son, look, you can have a car, we don't mind paying for you to be insured, we'll pay your road tax and we'll support you, but you have one of these boxes, and it worked for them. And the boxes are innocuous enough, they're easy enough to fit. And my view is that there's no reason why it shouldn't be the subject of some fairly adult discussion and acceptance in a household.
Excellent. Cost of insurance for young people we mentioned at the beginning. How often is it that young people will drive uninsured? And I've heard this before, that people say, well, it's so cruel if it costs them £2,000 a year and they live in the countryside and it's hemming in their safety. Does it encourage youngsters to drive uninsured?
I don't know. It's said that it encourages families perhaps to look at cheaper options. Whether it encourages youngsters to drive uninsured, I don't know. I think I found that there's a very small, and I think a relatively small, section of the young community that is prepared to simply drive uninsured and to make the positive decision to do so, because it is serious. If they have an accident, the financial implications, quite apart from the legal ones, are severe. And I'm not convinced there are very many that do it deliberately, because they say, well, I can't afford it, but I need to drive, so I'm just going to drive. I don't think that happens. It does happen, but I don't think it's significant.
David, it's been really interesting having you on the show this morning. I know you had to battle through gruesome traffic and, probably pretty gruesome weather as well to be with us, so we're very grateful to you.
No, nice to be here.
If you would like to find out more from David's website, probably as parents you might find some interesting tips there, motorists-lawyer-kent.co.uk. Thank you for being with us.